short while ago, a museum in Brazil, 200 years old, lost a great deal of its collections to a fire. The fire was not arson, to the best of my understanding. The fire occurred due to years of neglect and lack of maintenance, thus leading to the circumstances of the fire. And in the collections that were destroyed, there were priceless fossils, mummies, frescoes from ancient Rome, etc., etc. A lot of important things have forever been lost. And so it's on that note that I'm making this video, and I know this video is going to indubitably rub people the wrong way. I'm aware of that. But I feel it's a necessity to state certain things I'm about to state. These days, it's very trendy to go out on the internet and rant and rave about the fall of Western civilization, the loss of European culture, the European people, etc., etc. And this is done, not always, but almost invariably, in the form of being a keyboard warrior, ranting and raving, as I said, on the internet about these things. And whilst I can understand the inclination to do that, I think these people who engage in this activity are missing the big picture. Now, frankly speaking, from my vantage point, I don't know how dire the situation is. I am not one of these people who thinks the end is as nigh as it's claimed to be, but let's just take these people at their word. Let's actually lend credence to their belief that Europeans are about to disappear, and European civilization, Western civilization, more generally, is about to disappear too, and that there's an acute need to address this issue. Well, okay, fair enough. What is the best way to address this issue? Ranting on the internet? Making videos? Ranting about, I don't know, anti-whiteness? Making videos about it? Writing comments about it? Just how bad it is and how this is happening? I reckon that is not the best way to proceed. Now, I know I'm going to come off as an elitist here, and it's not my intention, but I know that's what's going to happen, inevitably, or that's going to be the interpretation of what I'm about to say. But if you're truly concerned about what is happening, and you truly believe the situation to be as dire as you claim it to be, with respect to European civilization, Western civilization, or even quote-unquote white people, whatever that means, then you're best served by using your time in a way that will help cultivate the things that have in this civilization been cultivated in the past. And I say this as someone who actually in his life has done the legwork to do this. For years I studied Latin, and to a lesser extent ancient Greek. I studied ancient Germanic languages. I spent time studying the classics. I spent time reading the great works of literature, the Boccaccio's, the Dante's, the Michel de Montaigne's, etc., etc., Chaucer, Shakespeare, Beowulf, all that stuff. If you're really interested in and worried about European culture and civilization, then do the goddamn work. Study this stuff, learn this stuff, and teach other people. I assure you, it's a far greater use of your time than ranting in a comment section or making a video about these things. Now, some people think that the best thing you can do is just to have white babies. Well, if that's what you want to do, go ahead. Just have quote-unquote white babies or European babies. Nobody's stopping you. But even there, I see it all too rare that people are actually engaging in copulation and procreation, pumping out white babies. So really, a lot of what I see is that manifestation of the keyboard warrior. And if that's what you want to be, that's fine. But if you really think it's enough simply to exist and simply to be European, and that's enough to pay tribute to the patrimony that's been handed to you, I can assure you that you're sorely mistaken. If you think being ignorant of your heritage and past, of not being able to understand things that have preceded you, of being unfamiliar with the literature, of not knowing the languages, of not knowing all the things that went into this thing we call the Occident, Western civilization, if you think none of that is necessary and that you merely need to exist as a person of a certain ethnicity, I can assure you, you are mistaken. Nobody in the past who actually cared about these things and sought to preserve these things thought it was enough to merely exist as whatever they were. Englishmen, Welshmen, Italians. No, they did the legwork. They went out, they studied these things. They became human repositories of knowledge and learning. And that path of becoming that, becoming something or someone who understands these things and can transmit these things to other people, is more available and open to you than it ever has been in the entirety of human history. Whereas the Italian scholars of the Renaissance had to scrape through whatever they could find to piece together, cobble together, a somewhat unknown past of antiquity, their heritage, their legacy. You, Lord Keyboard Warrior, have access to all of these things. If you wanted to study Latin, you could start right now. You could take online lessons. And in a few short months, you could be reading Cicero in the original. Now, you're interested in philosophy? Well, you can read some of it. You can read it in the Penguin Classic Translation, widely available. If you're interested in Plato, Aristotle, Epictetus, maybe you have an interest in history. You can read these things too. You can read Plutarch and his essays and lives in the original, if you so will, if you want to learn and take the time. Or maybe you're an Anglo-Saxon warrior, as I see oftentimes these keyboard warriors type, and you have an interest in your culture, as you put it. Well, you can go out right now and study Old English, or Anglo-Saxon if you wish to call it such. You might want to start with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, because it's written in easy-to-understand prose, and from there you could move on to more difficult things, like the Battle of Maldon, or the Wanderer, or even Beowulf. You see, you have these options available to you. You can become a repository of learning and knowledge. You can actually walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. And more importantly, you can actually become somebody who can transmit these things. You can become part of the legacy that you claim to want to represent and claim is so important to preserve. And I say this as someone who actually has done some of this work in the past. I didn't need to feel threatened to do so. I was driven simply by a desire for knowledge and internal passion. So if you think that merely existing is enough to preserve the patrimony of your ancestors, again, I assure you, you are mistaken. If you think that merely existing is enough to justify a legacy that exists and persists today, I assure you, you are mistaken. Just think of the past and all the knowledge that has been lost, and of the men who actually took the time to preserve what could be preserved, to write it down, to memorize it, to transmit it to future generations. And think about that museum that lost fossils, but also frescoes, mummies, and other works. You see, if we do not actively attempt to establish a link to the past and try to actively understand our connection to it, then it becomes meaningless. Your existence as a European person is meaningless in that sense. And you might not want to hear that, but it's the truth. If you want to be an heir to the legacy of your ancestors, your existence is insufficient. You need to study the things that made whatever civilization or particular culture you regard as great, great. It's not enough to say, hey, I'm English. I am heir to the legacy of Shakespeare. No, you need to read Shakespeare. And more importantly, you should learn early modern English to understand the nuance and complexity of his language. Merely existing and saying, I am the heir to Shakespeare, to Chaucer, to Beowulf, because I am English. Well, I'm not English, and yet for some strange reason I can run laps around so-called English people in all these areas, despite them claiming to be heirs to this legacy. And why did I take the time to study this stuff? Passion, for one thing, but also the sheer fact that English is a fascinating language, and it is my native language, and it has managed to spread itself throughout the world. And so I thought to myself, what legacy is that? I need to study that. I think the time of being a keyboard warrior is drawing to a close. I think the time of rising to the occasion and doing more than ranting and raving about the exigencies of our time is coming to a close. I think the work needs to be done. Be the change you want to be. Study and learn the things that made Europe great and the culture that you claim to be part of. It's not enough just to sit in front of a computer screen and rant about things. And if you can't do that, you probably don't really have a lot to say. And your claims to the European legacy and patrimony that you think are justified merely by existing, well, again, they're not good enough. Anyway, I am sure I've rubbed many people the wrong way with this discussion, rant, however you want to put it. But I've said all these things from a place of concern. It concerns me that people who are so interested, allegedly, in European civilization, preserving its culture, its heritage, etc., don't want to do the work that's required to do so. Because it's a lot easier to sit in front of a computer screen and type a couple of comments than spend day in and day out studying Latin or learning about any of these things. That requires actual work. It requires getting, as Jim would say, the noggin jogging. And that's fine. If you have no interest in that, fair enough. But I would also say that if your interest is not in that, then your interest in preserving European civilization culture also doesn't exist. Because at the end of the day, your mere existence, bereft of the knowledge that you could acquire, is not enough to pass on the traditions of the past. It's not enough to pass on the torch of knowledge, of heritage. It's not. Just existing, and even just reproducing, it's not enough. And people, learned men of the past, knew this, which is why they studied these things. They studied these things, they passed on the knowledge, etc., etc. Anyway, that's what I have to say about this. I'm sure, again, I've rubbed people the wrong way. I can't say it wasn't my intention, but I can also say that it wasn't a hostile intention. I just would like to see people do the things that they claim to be interested in, and I don't see it. I rarely hear it. And it's very unfortunate, I find, in a general sense, but specifically as somebody who greatly appreciates European civilization, its past, literature, its thoughts, etc. I think it's a great shame that it has come to this in this day and age of keyboard warriors. In any event, I shall check you out later, assuming I'm still alive and my health holds up. And until then, you take care. May the gods watch over you.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.